Hello students, we are going to continue on in our chapter 5 lesson 3 notes, a call to arms, and this is picking up at Lexington and Concord. We just left off talking about the midnight ride of Paul Revere and him letting the Minutemen know that the British were on their way. Remember, the British that we're talking about here are ones that were sent by Thomas Gage to find the weapons and ammunition that the militia was stockpiling, and they were going to destroy those weapons and ammunition when they found them. So the British are heading toward Concord, where they believe that they will find these weapons, and they have to go through a place that's called Lexington. So Lexington and Concord are two towns, but they're right near each other. And so they are walking through Lexington, and it asks, what did the British find when they approached Lexington? So I will read under Lexington and Concord. Meanwhile, the British continued their march. At dawn, the Redcoats approached Lexington. There they ran into about 70 Minutemen. Led by Captain John Parker, the Minutemen stood on the town commons with muskets in hand. Badly outnumbered, the Minutemen were about to give way to the Redcoats. Just then, a shot was fired. From where is still not clear. Both sides let loose an exchange of bullets. When the shooting ended, 8 Minutemen lay dead. I'm going to stop reading there so we can answer this first question. And so it tells us right here, when they were going into Lexington, they ran into about 70 Minutemen. And they were ready to fight because these are the Minutemen who are warned by Paul Revere. Remember, we just talked about the Midnight Ride. But our men who were marching to Concord to seize the weapons and ammunition from the British, there were 700 of them. We got that information in our part of our lesson from the last time, that Thomas Gage sent 700 British soldiers. So 700 to 70 is quite an advantage, right? So it says here that the Minutemen were about to give way, meaning that they were about to just kind of let the British soldiers keep on going without any kind of a fight, because they understood how outnumbered they were. And this is all going with number 2, what happened when the troops met. And because they got there, and the British were basically like, look, we're going to completely annihilate you. Why don't you just step back and let us pass on through? And so they're not stupid. They went, yep, I think that's what we're going to do. And so they decided that they were going to retreat, or again, just let them kind of walk on by, because there were 700 of them and only 70 Minutemen. And MM here is Minutemen. I put that up here, Minutemen, and then MM in parentheses. Okay, so the Minutemen, we're going to just let the soldiers go by, the British soldiers. But then what happened next, again, we don't really know exactly how this next piece happened. Somebody fired. We don't know who it was. We don't know if it was a Minuteman. We don't know if it was a British soldier. We don't know if it was fired at someone or if it was fired in the air. We don't know if it was intentional. We don't know if it was accidental. All we know is that a shot was fired. And we talked about this with the Boston Massacre, that if one shot is fired and everybody else has guns, what's probably going to happen? More bullets are going to start flying. And so that's exactly what happened. A shot came from nowhere, is what they say. And then shots were fired by both sides. And again, you probably would imagine a little bit of this outcome is that the colonists are going to be the ones who are on the side that didn't turn out so good for, because there's only 70 of them and 700 of the British soldiers. But so when the fighting ended, there were 8 Minutemen dead, 1 British soldier wounded. So this doesn't take long, and the British are going to continue on their way. So I'm going to keep on reading here. After finding only a few weapons in Concord, what did the British troops do? Okay, so the British are going to continue on to Concord. While some troops burned the few weapons they found, the others met a group of Minutemen waiting at the North Bridge. In a short battle, the British took heavy losses. They began to make their way back to Boston. So they got to Concord. They only found a few weapons. So here we go. Some troops burned the few weapons they found. Okay. So then they started on their way back to Boston. So it was pretty uneventful here. They technically completed their mission. They made it to Concord. They found some weapons. They destroyed whatever there was, and then they went back to Boston. So that's our next part there, that they started to head back to Boston. It's going to get a little bit more exciting coming up here in the next question. I'll preview the question and then I'll read before I switch the page. So our next question says, what happened to the British troops on their march back to Boston from Concord? Okay, so this is now on their way back. I'm going to read, all along the road, the colonists hid behind trees and fired on the soldiers. By the time the Redcoats reached Boston, at least 174 were wounded and 73 were dead. About 60 years later, poet Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote in the Concord Hymn that the Americans at Lexington and Concord had fired the shot heard round the world. The battle for independence had begun. So what happened to the British troops on their march back to Boston? That here is pretty much what we're going to put, but we're going to add one more thing in here because it doesn't tell you how is it now that the Minutemen, that the colonists were able to do this, because we had only 70 Minutemen, right? And then 8 of them were killed. So that puts us down to 62. There's still 700 British soldiers that were marching to Concord and now are coming back to Boston. Well, what the text doesn't tell us is that while these British troops were going to Concord, they got more Minutemen. They alerted more Minutemen. Those 62 men that were left over before didn't just go home and give up. They went home and got more men to help them. And so there were 300 Minutemen that were waiting to surprise attack the British when they came back from Concord. So by the time they made it back to Boston, there was 174 British soldiers who were wounded and 73 who were killed. Now, that's still not that bad compared to the 700 that they have, right? But only 300 Minutemen were able to attack and cause this kind of carnage for the British. And the part that made them the most successful was that they hid behind trees and behind fences, and they surprise attacked the British. So they didn't know how exactly to fight back when their targets are hidden. So it made it more difficult for the British to be successful. So for that situation, we kind of are going to call this a win for the colonists. But our number 5 question is asking, why is this Battle of Lexington and Concord so important? Now, even though they're technically 2 battles, they're almost always combined together when they're referred to because they happened within such a short period of time of each other. And so why they're so important is because this has now begun the American Revolutionary War, which is the war for independence from Great Britain. And that has that mention of that down here. The battle for independence has begun. And so now they're going to try to actually break away from Great Britain and create their own country, their own government that's separate from Great Britain. So there's a nickname for these battles, and it's also given here in this paragraph, although it doesn't say that it's a nickname here. So I am telling you what it is, and that is the shot heard round the world. So the reason why it's called the shot heard around the world is not because it's literally heard around the world, right? If someone fires a gun, you can hear it from a great distance, but you certainly can't hear it from around the world. You can't even hear it from, city over from another. So why it's called that is because everyone around the world heard about these battles that took place. They knew what happened, and now they're all waiting to see what happens next. And the reason why they want to know so badly what's going to happen next, why this intrigues them so much around the world, is because of who's fighting. It's Great Britain, which is the most powerful empire in the world, and they are going against a group of people who don't have a government. They are not united together. They have no army, and they are fighting against the greatest empire in the world. And so this is going to be something to pay attention to for them. And I refer to as the 13 colonies as the underdog. So when you have a matchup between two sides, and one side is known to be really great and has, a lot of wins under their belt, and the other side is weaker or slower or not as skilled, they are very much less likely to come out a winner, right? So everyone's very curious as to what's going to happen with this underdog of America going up against the most powerful empire in the world. And spoiler alert, the underdog wins. That's how we are, who we are today, the United States. Now, this Battle of Lexington and Concord took place on April 19th, 1775. So you will again realize that this is not yet the end of lesson 3. We still have more information to add to lesson 3. So you are not going to be submitting this to me quite yet. But today we are going to pause here because I told you in the last lesson that you were going to watch a clip about Paul Revere and Lexington and Concord. So that's what we're going to be doing next.